We're going to talk about cost-benefit analysis that's part of the PHMSA rulemaking, and that's all I'm going to say about it. And I just want to introduce the facilitator, who's going to be Sarah Gossman, who's the Pipeline Safety Trust Vice President.
I told my co-panelists that I thought there would be 5 people in the front row, so I'm impressed with the audience in terms of this. I think cost-benefit analysis is the most interesting thing on the planet, but I may not be representative of everyone. So we're going to talk about the cost-benefit analysis. That is the part of rulemaking, and I have here 2 fabulous speakers, John Gale, Director of Standards and Rulemaking at PHMSA, and Bill Bird, President of RCP Incorporated. So the way we're going to run this is John's going to come up and give an overview of cost-benefit analysis as it applies to pipelines. I'm going to talk a little bit about a specific cost-benefit analysis in the proposed liquids rule, and talk a little bit about some concerns I have just generally based off of that about cost-benefit analysis and pipelines, and then Bill will round it out by talking about different but concerns about cost-benefit analysis. So with that, I will hand it over to John.
Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon, everybody. Glad to see a very large crowd that remains for us this afternoon. Carl, I want to thank you for inviting me to attend this conference and to inviting me to speak. I was going to make a comment about the thought of having this on a Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock in the middle of New Orleans, but I think that's well said already. But I am appreciative of the fact that the title of this session is not what's wrong with the rulemaking process. With that being said, I've got some goals for this talk. This talk is not for those that are familiar with the rulemaking process. The goals of this talk is to talk to those who are not familiar with the rulemaking process. And so you have a better understanding of how that process works and how you can be involved in that process, and you can feel that your views and your opinions are heard in that process, because that's very important. As we do rulemaking, we can only be as good as those who are involved, and we want to hear from everybody. We want to hear our critiques. We want to hear our positives. We want to hear our negatives, and we want to know where we can improve, because we constantly want to improve. And we obviously need to, because we're not able right now to get these changes through as quickly as we want to. I think that we all want to. So one of my goals today is to talk to you about that process and where you can interject yourself into that process, because it's very important. And then, of course, we're going to talk about cost-benefit analysis and how cost-benefit analysis plays a role in that process. I've been involved in rulemakings for way too many years, going back to the 80s. And nowadays, cost-benefit analysis is by far very, very dominant in the decision-making process. And what's key is that it is a process, right? Is that when we go through this, I can't get together with Jeff and Alan and Ms. Dominguez, et cetera, and say, hey, we've got the greatest thing that we think can solve everything, and let's get together, write it up, and go to the Federal Register and publish it. We can't do that. We have rules we have to follow. There's processes we have to follow. But for us to be effective, we have to know the process. And I think for us to get better, we have to do a better job of informing you guys of how that process works. I was reading the newsletter, the Pipeline Safety newsletter, and I thought it was a very interesting comment in there in that you guys didn't just describe the liquid rule. What you said in the rule was, in your article was, you're going to reach out to everyone to help them understand the rule so that they can comment effectively. And that's what we want to try to get better at. There are the historical ways of comment process and information that we put on the websites, but we want to get better to how we can make sure people understand what we're proposing so that they can be more effective in that process. So there's nothing better in the middle of the afternoon than having a large slide with very fine print in front of you. And I'm not going to, believe me, we're not going to try to go through all these little points. But what it shows is the steps. This is a chart you'll actually see on the OMB website. It was done by a contractor a few years back. But it does a really good job of outlining the steps that you have to go through in a rulemaking. Right? They call it the 9-step. Luckily, in pipeline, we get 9+1 steps. And I'll explain that a little further. It also shows some of the analysis we have to perform. We have to perform all kinds of analysis. We don't just have to write a Federal Register document. We have to do all kinds of analysis to support the publication of that document. So I'm going to go through a couple of the steps with you. Step one is what we call the initiating event. Like to call it the problem. The rulemaking effectively is a proposed solution to a problem. And what we're looking for is comments from the public on that solution. Sometimes if we don't necessarily know where we want to go with a proposed solution, we'll do what's called an advance notice of proposed rulemaking. And we'll outline the problem or problems and then ask for input for what should we propose next. But in most cases, what you're going to have is a notice of proposed rulemaking. And then after we identify the problem, we identify the fact we want to do a rule, that's when we start to develop things like the cost-benefit analysis to support what we want to make the change to make. We also have to do small business impacts. A lot of people will say, how many small businesses are in the pipeline industry? There's a lot. And usually where you're going to find them are your small utilities. A lot of small utilities can be small businesses, and we have to perform a small business impact analysis to support that rule. We also have to do what's called our information collections. If we do any kind of report changes or any data requirements, we have to do all kinds of information support documents or Paperwork Reduction Act requirements to support the movement of that rule. So we get that document together, we got all of our analysis together. Can we go to the Federal Register yet? Not necessarily. If the rule is deemed what's called significant, and I'll get into that in a second, OMB has to review the rule. And until they finish their review, can we publish the rule? But let's say we get through OMB, we publish the rule, and then we're going to publish it in the Federal Register, and we're going to have public comment. And this is one of the most important steps we have in the process for the public, and it's where we want our comments. And believe me, we will get negative comments. I don't know of any rule where I've never gotten a negative comment. But what I'll tell you, my experiences are, what we tend not to get are the positive comments. And a lot of people would be like, well, we supported it, so we didn't supply any comments. It's just as important to get those positive comments. And I strongly encourage, even if you support something, if you have the time, is to submit those positive comments as well. So you have the website there, it's www.regulations.gov. Basically, you go in there, you pop in what's called the docket number, which you can find on the title of the rule, and you can submit your comments. It's fairly straightforward. There's another website there, and I'll talk long enough, hopefully you can write it down, which is the federalregister.gov/agencies. And they're like little snapshots for every federal agency out there about what they're about, what rulemakings, what other federal register notices they have out there that they're requesting comments on. So when you get to that point, you would just search for PHMSA, and you'd find the PHMSA page. I find it very, very, very helpful, so I just wanted to share that bit of information. So after the NPRM, we have to go to the advisory committee. This is what I like to call our extra step. We have two advisory committees, one for the liquid committee and one for the natural gas committee. Carl is on the liquid committee, been there since 2002, Carl, roughly. And they give us advice and guidance on the publication of the rule. But I want to stress something very importantly, that they do not have the final say in what's in that final rule. That authority resides and rests with our secretary and our administrator, and is never pulled away from them. Right? We can and we have not always moved forward with what the advisory committee recommends, and all we have to do is explain it. But there's nothing that limits us from publishing a rule that's in conflict with the advisory committee. Their opinion is very important to us, and it's a very important process. But the final authority to issue the rule resides with our secretary and our administrator. So we've gone through the advisory committee, we've developed our final rule, we're going to have to go back to OMB again. And then we're going to publish the rule in the Federal Register, and we'll have an effective date. And even at this point, people can appeal the rule even after we've published it. And we've had a couple of appeals on our miscellaneous rule, for example, that we published last year. We had, I think, 3 appeals on that rule. So the process can continue on a little bit further after that. So as I was pointing out, if you have a non-significant rule, when PHMSA is done with its action, we go to the Federal Register. However, not many of our rules are non-significant. There's a point just about a year or so ago, I think 8 of 9 of our rules had been deemed significant. Because we give a recommendation on what is a significant rule, but OMB makes the final decision. So, what is a significant rule? What is a significant rule is dictated by an executive order. It's an order issued by the president. In this case, it's called Executive Order 12866, which was actually issued by President Clinton and reaffirmed by President Obama. And you see there's basically 4 components of a definition of significant. A lot of people get hung up on the first one. They think all rules that are significant hit what's called the $100 million threshold, but that's not the case. If you look at the very last bullet, it says raise novel legal or policy issues arising out of legal mandates, et cetera, that's usually what the standard is that you could meet and then make a rule significant. So, and like I said, what's important to note is that most of the rules that PHMSA deals with in the pipeline side are significant and have to go through the added step. And just to reaffirm, I just wanted to point out the steps that we have to go through. Like I said, we can't get together, as a group and decide what rules we want to move forward through. We have to move them through a process. So after we're done with them, we're going to obviously get it through our administrator. Then we have to go, if it's significant, to our office's secretary, and then to the Office of Management and Budget. And we're constrained by, or not constrained by, but limited by our statutes. Sometimes our statutes will have limitations on what we can or cannot regulate, and we can't go above those statutes. So where can you find more information about rules? There's a lot of good information out there. We have our own websites. We call our historical archive, where we're trying to post all the historical rulemakings out there, so you can do some of your own research. We also post, of course, the rules that we just recently published. We have a lot of other information out there, like all our special permits and the like. But there's a couple reports I wanted to also point out to you. One is what's called the DOT Significant Rulemaking Report. Chris McLaren referred to this yesterday in talking about the gas roll. And this is a good report because you can look there and see what significant rules we're working on. You can see where they're at, usually in the stage, and you can also see what the estimated date is for the next action. And in some cases, you can actually see what the information is completed. OMB also has a pretty good website where they will, when they have a rule that's been sent to them, because it goes to them after OST, well, they are going to show on their public website those rules they actually have in their possession that they're reviewing today. And then they'll show when they're completed. So then that is regulations, reginfo.gov. And what I have for us right now is a quick snippet from the significant rule report. It actually shows not just what's going on currently, there's a report monthly, and you can see the historical reports that have been issued. And here's a snippet from one of our rules, and you can kind of see the steps. It kind of helps, in my opinion, helps to show the process a little bit better. You can see with this rule, we transmitted it to OST back in June of 2012. You can scroll down, you can see we actually transmitted it from OST to OMB in May of 2014, and then finally published the rule in the Federal Register in October of 2015. So it's a very valuable tool. I think it's a very helpful tool to everyone to kind of keep track of the rules that we have in process and to keep informed of where they are in that process. So cost benefit and its role in the rulemaking process. What's important to note is that we have certain laws and dictates that we have to follow when we develop our rules. And some of those are what's called these executive orders. There's 12866. We also have Executive Order 13563. And we even have our own statute that talks about cost benefit. And the overriding position of all of those is basically the statement here, which is agencies should propose or adopt a regulation only upon a reasoned determination that its benefits justify its costs. Now, there's a lot of ways of calculating benefits. A lot of the common ways is that you're looking at accident histories. You're going to look at property damage, the deaths and injuries, et cetera. And you're going to look at unquantifiable costs. But a majority of the costs that we're going to look at in most cases are going to be those that are associated with the incidents and how we can prevent those incidents from occurring in the future. And it makes it challenging sometimes. So not only do we have these executive orders, though, we have a very similar language in our own statute. And this is in the Pipeline Safety Act. I had never seen this before when I came over here, which is, it's very similar to what's in that executive order, is that we can't issue a rule, they call it a standard in this case, unless upon a reasoned determination that the benefits of the attendance standard justify its costs. So that's the controls and the conditions we have when we get these requirements. So we can have a very good idea, but we have to go through this process to make sure that the intended effect justify the costs. We also hear a lot about mandates and discretion. If you have a mandate, then of course you have to do it. We actually, even if it's a mandate, we still have to do cost-benefit analysis. But also, I think it's also important to point out is that when you look at some of these mandates, you have to look for very key words in some cases. You've got to look for things like appropriate, reasonable, because as soon as you see words like that, that could potentially limit or provide discretion to us as we develop that analysis and develop that rulemaking change. And therefore, it's subject to a higher scrutiny in our cost-benefit analysis. So I did a little excerpt of some of the data we have. Found it interesting from Carl's presentation yesterday. When we look at the different metrics, and we definitely look at our metrics. We're constantly looking at improving the data that we collect. But when we look at it, we have to look into the component or the area that we're affecting. Right? We can't just look broadly and look at all the incidents that affect pipelines. If it's a gas transmission rule, we're looking at gas transmission incidents. And not only in that case, we're not just looking at gas transmission incidents, we're looking specifically at those incidents that rule could prevent. So we don't get to look at the whole scope. We can only look at those that we would prevent if this rule had been in place, if the status quo would change, so to speak. So when you look at gas transmission, over a 20-year average, we've had approximately 2 fatalities and 9 injuries, and property damage is about $88.6 million. But if you take out things that may be not affected by the rule, if excavation damage wouldn't be affected by the rule change, or outside or natural force damages, just to give you an idea or a snapshot, so to speak, the average fatalities drops to around 1 over a 20-year period, or an average. The number of injuries drops to 6, and your property damage is about $52.3 million. So when we affect some of these rule changes, can be a little costly. It makes it challenging, right? These are just challenges to affect the changes that we're trying to get through the rulemaking system. To give you some ideas, there was, in looking at different ways, we're looking at the provision on the grandfather clause and to require hydro testing of all the gas transmission lines out there. There have been different estimates of the number of miles, but some estimates have been about 45,000 miles out there that we'd potentially be affecting by some of the changes we're looking at. There's different estimates out there about how much it could cost per mile. I've seen estimates from $100,000 to $1 million per mile on hydro testing certain lines. So when you multiply those numbers together, those numbers get really big really fast. So, and we have to compare, again, like I said, we have to compare those cost numbers to those incident numbers that we just did. And it makes it challenging to move those rules through the system. I thought it was interesting when we published MPMS, the changes the first time. This is the comments that related to the first time, not the second proposal. We estimated that the impact of that rule would be roughly $85 million over 3 years. INGA came in at roughly $820 million, covering roughly their infrastructure. And then API was a fairly high number as well. So you can see when we're looking at rules like the gas transmission rule, the valve and leak detection rulemaking, the hazardous liquid rulemaking, all these things come together and we have a set pool of benefits that we can affect. It makes it even more challenging to get through that rulemaking process. So, some thoughts. Rulemaking is a process. We have rules we have to follow. We have things we have to do. We have steps we have to go through. But we can get better if we have more public engagement. We can get better if we can get better data. There's a lot of people that say if we can improve that MPMS, get a lot more information, we can identify the specific threats that are out there, and we can target not only our inspectors, but maybe even our rulemaking efforts as well. Because data is important. When we do, some of the things we're looking at in terms of cost benefit is we want to get better at it. We want to inject it earlier into the process. We want to inject it into our management discussions earlier into the process, because in the long run, if right now, there's obviously a lot of comments about how quickly we can get these rules through the system. To me, the biggest challenge we have to doing that is better cost benefit and better or regulatory impact assessment, whatever you want to call it. So we have to get better at that. So we're trying to bring additional resources to the office, hiring more economists. We're trying to get better data, understand the data. You know, like we were looking at the thumbs up, thumbs down the other day. We have to figure out what that data is telling us so we can make the case for moving these rulemakings through the system. Because if we can't do a better job, we're going to continue to struggle to get these rules out. So that's some of our goal. We also want to improve our public engagement. We definitely want to improve our public engagement. You know, one of the problems, you know, I have been around a little too long, I guess, sometimes. But, you know, so I'm used to the old way of doing business a little bit. But we're looking at new ways to get that public engagement. We're going to reach out for the liquid rule. We're going to reach out to some of the groups that commented, and we're going to offer briefings to these groups to get feedback. So you guys, again, I thought it was very interesting, the comment in the newsletter. So you guys can better understand the rule. In other words, you know, the days of just publishing the rule, stepping back, waiting for the public comments to come in, that's not good enough anymore. We're going to try to figure out a way we can get the information out to you guys better so you can better understand it and give us better comments on that process.